Okay, so welcome everybody, and let me just start by quickly introducing the new board of directors that we have. So again, for those of you that don't know me, I'm Arvid Marcus. I'm the current president of our Chinook Calgary section. I am from Norway. There's where the accent is from, but I did spend 11 years in Houston before I came off to Calgary in 2018. And I'm an active member of the AACE organization since 2014. So with us, we have a very strong board. Very happy to work with everybody there. Just quickly mention maybe the officers. So we have Ahmed, who is the vice president and incoming president. We have Victoria Bravo. I don't think she can join us tonight. She's our treasurer. Mark Rust, our secretary, and our past president, Paul Boussin. So if we look at what we have planned for 2021-2022 program year, I wrote this a few hours ago, and that was before the press conference at 6 p.m. tonight. But we will continue with technical dinners, of course. We will do those monthly with a break over Christmas. We were planning of doing the October one in person. That will most likely not happen anymore, I guess, then, if the rumors are correct from what I heard. But we will continue online with Zoom meetings, if not. The skills and knowledge workshops, we will carry on with those. We did them last year very successfully with like a 1 hour lunch and learn session. So we hope many of you can join us for those. And then we are planning to have a symposium, a 2-day symposium in Calgary in the April timeframe. So stay tuned for updates on that. And of course, COVID is throwing a curveball at us, but we'll see what we can come up with. For those of you that join us tonight and are not currently a member of AACE, I just want to remind you some of the benefits that you can have. And we encourage, of course, everybody to become a member and everybody to recruit new members, because there's a lot of benefits in this. You have access to the total cost management framework. You have access to a lot of good recommended practices. You have, and maybe, Matthew, have you written some of those? I believe I've seen your name there.
I have not authored one yet.
Okay, but we do, I'm sure your name is there somewhere. We do have a lot of cost engineering journals and the newsletter with source. There's a virtual library with more than 5,000 articles, and you get discounts on the AACE activities, such as the technical dinners, the workshop, and whatnot. So recommend everybody to consider joining that. And if you wonder how to join, how to become a member, you'll go into the international aacei.org webpage, and there is a member section in there where you can read more about all the benefits, how to become, and how to can be more active in the community. For our people here in the area that wants to know what we are doing, we recommend everybody to keep staying in touch with us. And the best way to do that is to join our LinkedIn page. So we have our official LinkedIn channel for this section. We will post upcoming technical dinners and events there. We have a website, aaceicalgary.org, that is posting some general information, and we'll try to upload the past recordings of our presentation in there. We have a communication email going out that you can subscribe to, and of course, everybody here at the board is welcoming you to connect with us if you have any questions or comments or seek any information, and we help you out there. So with that, the next technical meeting will be in October, I guess not in person. So the location will be Zoom. And then, as mentioned, Stephanie will do an introduction about women in project controls at the beginning. So very excited to hear about both of those. And Troy Donovan, he did a presentation for us, a different presentation for us last year, which was very well received. So looking forward to getting a new one from him. Okay, said enough. Matthew, Schoenhardt, let me introduce you and stop my sharing here. Matthew Schoenhardt, a long-time supporter of the AACE Calgary section, and while he does other money-related topics and capital projects like world-class economic analysis, Matthew's claim to fame is that he has completed over $100 billion of risk and contingency assessments. Matthew is a world-class expert on paramedic contingency processes and the creator of one of the only independent paramedic models in the world. Matthew, the floor is yours.
Oh, fantastic. And we're going to be sharing my screen. And so everyone can see a title screen right now? Oh,
yes, we can.
I'll fix that. Yeah, give me some thumbs up, yes. And then co-host, if you can keep watching for people as they come in, because we're still getting some stragglers. So what we're going to see tonight is a paper I originally wrote in 2017. It was presented at the AACE conference that was in Toronto. I have a new email address now, though. That is matthew@datadrivenrisk.com. And if you like the types of things, as I'm saying, I put things to LinkedIn periodically of all sorts of videos and such of that nature on thoughts on risk management in capital projects. And I've actually just recently put the entire back catalog of 30 or 40 2-minute vignettes or 3-minute vignettes on YouTube. So anyhow, as we go along tonight, if you have a question, because I haven't made something clear, which is my fault, not your fault for not understanding, throw it in the chat. I'll keep an eye on the chat because I want to answer the questions where I'm not clear as soon as possible. Because if it's not clear to you, it's not clear to everybody else. If it's a discussion type question, hold that to the end and we'll take some fun Q&As at the end. So I'll introduce myself. My name is Matthew Schoenhardt, done $100 billion. And we're supposed to say fun things about yourselves, and I've got hives. I caught them on purpose. So last summer with COVID, the boys and I, they couldn't do anything. So we made this custom backpack, bee vacuum. And we caught like 16 wild swarms of bees last summer. And there's one of the swarms we caught, and there's my eldest son harvesting honey probably 2 years ago. And raw unpasteurized honey is like garden vegetables. It's way tastier than store-bought honey. So we're going to do polls throughout the evening to keep you engaged. And so this is our first poll, which is politely, who are you and what do you do? And I'll give you practices at answering polls. So a poll should have popped up on your screen. And you can pick what kind of industry you work for and what kind of projects you work, what size projects you work on. And by the way, there's my correct email address. The other one will still get to me, but made a website and such since I've done this presentation for the first time. So are people answering the polls? Normally shows you how many people have answered, but I'm still seeing 0.
I can't select anything. It just says you're sharing the poll results.
Exactly, same thing with
Okay,
me.
well, thank you. What I'm going to end up relaunch poll.
Thanks for making sure I was paying attention.
There we go. There, how's that? There we go. Okay, because normally it's like you see a
better.
floor,
Yeah,
it's like I
good
can see
now.
the numbers go up, and I don't wait for everybody. I just get a general feel. So that's good. So most of us, lo and behold, are from Calgary and work in the energy industry. Shocking. But some people work in transportation and something other, and those who don't work directly in the energy industry are probably some consulting design for the energy industry. And in terms of size of projects, we see a smattering here, a little binomial. A bunch of people work on some small projects, We're not going to talk about small projects today. That's those things under 5 million, under 6 to 10 would also be sometimes considered small. And a lot of us work on those big projects, which is great because that's the type of project we're going to be looking at tonight. Oh, I got to share those results. There you can see them. So we're going to have polls throughout the evening. And we'll ask questions to make sure you're carrying along. So this is what we're going to see is the slides that have this background. They're exact slides from the AACE presentation. And every once in a while, we'll have these slides that are things I've added in since. And so the first one is, why should you care about what I have to say tonight? Now, who knows what that is? It's not a poll question. That is IPL's polypropylene plant. And I've been following this for two reasons. One, it's really interesting and really good for Alberta. And two, actually, I was actually initially asked to be a sub-consultant to the guys who did the risk and contingency on this. But they kind of saw my numbers and said, we can't share that. And I wasn't included in the final report. And we've known what's happened since then. So they started 4 years ago at a $3.5 billion estimate. That added like 40% to their balance sheet, plant, property, and equipment, huge increase. By 2020, they spent about $2.5 billion, and they increased the project cost to $4 billion. And they moved their in-service date from 2021 to 2022. And then in February of this year, Brookfield launched a hostile takeover bid. And there's the share purchase I got, the first one. You can see the top there right in February, because I own shares in IPL. Them offering, and here's another fun one, which is Inter Pipeline's response. It's a crappy bid. Can't see the date on that one, but of course we know it's going to happen because the white knight never really appeared. So why you should care about contingency and why you should have defendable contingency numbers on your projects is because if you get it wrong, it's going to cost your reputation, your job, and if you worked at IPL, it might cost you your company. So that's why it's really important that basically the single largest line item in your cost estimate is going to be your contingency, and you need to make sure that it's just as defendable as every other line item. And getting it wrong is a big problem. So here's our next poll. True or false? Ideally, should you use all your contingency or not? And the two answers is, yes, I should come in under budget because that shows off my skills as a project manager. I'm pretty good. Or false, contingency is meant to be spent. So most of you agree live in my world that contingency is actually meant to be spent. The definition of contingency for AACE is it is to be used to cover off all those things that I don't know about, but experience tells me I'm going to need to spend money on. Now, for the people who answered true, it's a pejorative question. I do that a lot. And it also depends on the nature of your host organization. If the organization you work with is a little bit old school, coming in under makes you look like a hero, when really coming in under means there's projects that are not going forward because I've eaten their funding. So we went through the introduction. I'm going to talk about, this is our agenda for tonight. I'm going to talk about contingency methods. I'll talk about the project that we looked at, complications, how we did it, check out how much effort it took to do, compare the actual results with the predicted results, check with the alignment of AACE and come up with some conclusions. And then number 10 is some bonus material. So this is the title match, ladies and gentlemen. On one side, we have range estimating. He's the perfect face. He's big, he's bold, he's beautiful. He's rippling with muscles and mathematical formulas. Everybody in the industry loves him. His competitor is the heel. Scrawny, weak, gets it done by trickery and backhanded methods. The challenge for this title match, ladies and gentlemen, is threefold. Accuracy. Can you actually predict what's going to happen? 2, cost. How much does it cost to get these guys going in the ring? 3, and how fast can they get to the answers? So ladies and gentlemen, let's get ready to rumble. Now, if we're doing this live, we'd all get up and put our business cards down on a betting table, but I can't do that. So we're going to get our next poll, and that's this one. Given the challenge, accuracy, cost, and speed, who wins this cage match? Life's more fun when you got money on the line. Okay, life has progressed. We're about 1/3, 2/3 in favor of Monte Carlo. That is abnormal. So we'll find out who wins. Oh, sorry, there are the results there. Almost exactly 1/3, 2/3. We'll find out who actually wins at the end of the presentation. Oh, there's that slide. So the first thing we're going to talk about is contingency methods. And how do you come up with contingency? And basically, AACE supports 4 different methods for assessing contingency. There's a family, a basis, and then there's a methodology. There's a simple approach and a sophisticated approach for each of them. So there's the opinion-based family, and that's expert opinion, where we just call up Drew. Drew's been working a long time. He knows everything. And we ask him how much contingency we should carry. And Drew tells us a number, and we write it down. Range estimating, ideally, range estimating should be empirical or data-driven, but most of the time, we actually don't have data on all the things we need to estimate. And so what ends up happening is, rather than asking Drew, how much contingency we need on the bottom line, we ask Drew and everybody else, give me a 3-point estimate for this line, and this line, and this line, and this line, and let's throw in a risk register, and we'll throw that in, and then run a Monte Carlo simulation. And this still says range estimating. There's other techniques, but basically it's some kind of Monte Carlo simulation driven by range estimating and the risk register. On the other side is empirical, is predetermined guidelines. Now, we all know an ACE class 3 estimate is +30 -20% accuracy. It's not quite true. It's actually, the guidelines are a range of ranges, and 20 plus 30 -20 is one benchmark of those ranges for a 30. They seem to work, and these rules of thumb seem to stand the test of time. So they're pretty good. And the final one is the parametric approach. And the parametric approach runs on this philosophy. You are no smarter than everyone who's come before you. Your project is no more difficult than all the projects that have come before you. So your performance will be comparable to those who have come before you on their projects. And that's it at its heart. It basically says we're no better today than we were 20, 40, 60, 80 years ago. And that's a pretty bitter pill to swallow. In fact, there's actually a lot of evidence that we're actually worse at estimating today than we were 30 years ago. So those are the 4 methodologies for doing contingency. Now we're going to see a bunch of probability distributions, and we're using this one right now. So expert opinion, if we ask Drew how much contingency we need, Drew says we need 10%. So it's perfectly known, exactly numbered. There's no range or uncertainty to it. Predetermined guidelines like the ACE class 3 definition, you might see a uniform distribution of +30 -20%. When you run Monte Carlos, they tend to give you a curve that looks like this. And finally, there's the parametric that gives you this fat, ugly curve. And so that's the kind of results you'll expect when you use different kinds of contingency estimating techniques. So the next poll is, stop sharing. How do you currently assess contingency at your place of work? Of the 4 methods, do you use expert opinion? Do you use ACE guidelines or rules of thumb? Do you run Monte Carlos? Or do you use a parametric approach? So we have a nice uniform split. Only two people use parametric. I want to know who those guys are. And lots of other people use Monte Carlos or AACE guidelines. And a few of us use expert opinions. So that's fun things to know. Maybe at the end of this night, you'll be thinking about other options. We'll find out about that as we go. So our project description. So this initial assessment was done back in 2012, 2013, and the site came online. I'm not going to tell you the date it came online because last time I did that, everyone in the room went, oh, I know that project. And we're trying to keep those people who are innocent. And you can see that the host company didn't want to be named. We'll find out why later. So the project was broken into two phases. Phase one was 131. Phase two was a little under 160 million Canadian. And again, that was back in 2012. So there were some complications on this project. It was a two-phase project, so that always brings up problems. The project teams were overburdened. There was a bit of rivalry between the two phases. The level of project development was disjointed. Despite the fact there was rivalry between the two phases, there was actually interdependency between the two phases. And then as the project progressed, phase two was broken into phase 2A and 2B. So we got lots of problems happening on this project. Then it gets worse. There was actually conflicting business scope of what was trying to be achieved. They actually retained 6 different design firms. So there wasn't a master engineering contractor who brought in subconsultants. They actually directly contracted with 6 different design firms who all threw their stuff in the center. And then there was actually a third party who was the project manager of this, and they were actually dismissed halfway through the project. So don't think this is going to be a sunshine and lollipops project when we look at the results, because that's one of the critiques that happens when I give this presentation. Yeah, it was not a pretty project. And I want to also confirm that while I came and did the risk and contingency analysis in 2012, 2013, I was not brought in for the rest of the project scope. So I'm not really sure what they did for risk management later on. I actually offered to this firm to do a free post-project mortem on risk and contingency, and they said, no, we don't want to know. So we're not going to talk about who they are. So here's the methodology of how we did the risk and contingency assessments on this, and we used 2 methods at once. So first, and the reason why we did 2 is the project manager at the time wanted both done. And I was like, it's a waste of money. And he was like, I want it both done. And I'm like a contractor. So I say, I told you what I think, and now I'll do what you tell me because you're going to pay me. So for the Monte Carlo, what we started off with, did some risk interviews to create a risk register. We qualitative screened those risks that we found. We cleaned up the risk register. Then we had a risk review session where we looked at all of our risks and assigned a confirmed range and uncertainties on them. And we did a quantitative evaluation on those risks that we had to include. And that would include all of the systemic and project specific risks. And then we did a range estimating process. Contrasting that, we also did the parametric approach. We used risk interviews, we did qualitative evaluation, we scrubbed the data, we had a risk review session, and we quantified only the project specific risks. And then we did a parametric contingency estimating process. And as you can see, lots of synergy on those things. So there's a lot of overlap. The things you're doing here, you're also doing here. And that's sort of important to remember as we go forward. Now, the next one is, if you only could have one method of risk identification, what would you use? Would you use team workshop or expert interview? Everybody likes the team workshop. And that's what most people are used to doing. And there's nothing wrong with the team workshop. And a few of you like expert interviews. So let's find out what we did. What I did almost 8 years ago, is we actually did interviews. And here are some thoughts on interviews versus team setting. So in a team setting, you're basically taking up an entire day or 8 hours of the project team's time. When we schedule one-on-one interviews, we only use 1 hour of the project team's time because everybody gets about an hour. It takes about the same amount of the consultant's time. What's nice about the team setting is you get that collaboration, you get sharing, you get project understanding. If this is a new team, you can use it as a team building experience, that storming, norming, performing concept. It's very good for those things. One of the downsides, of course, with group meetings is that you get groupthink. And I've been in some team workshops where, director says, well, the answer is this. And everybody goes, we're not going to argue with the director. Not publicly anyhow. So there's some things you need to be concerned about with facilitated team meetings. One-on-one interviews, all on the flip side, they allow a lot of anonymity, things that people might not say in public, they'll talk one-on-one with. It allows you to dive deep into a subject matter expert's area of knowledge, and it forces engagement. When I'm talking with you for 20 minutes, half hour, you got to talk back because there's only 2 of us on the call. What you lose then, of course, is that interdisciplinary behavior. But we actually did interviews on this one just to reduce the costs of the project team. The next thing we're going to talk about is accuracy and precision. So this is an important concept in estimating, and accuracy and precision are not the same thing. We go back to high school. Accuracy is how close to the target are we? Precision is how repeatable is my performance? And so this archer has fair accuracy and fair precision, looks like a he, tends to be close to the target, but got some outliers. And if you plotted all that down here, you get a normal distribution. This is what low accuracy but good precision would be. You see, he is very good at hitting the blue circle, not so much at the target though, but very repeatably hitting the blue circle. So that's low accuracy. I'm not close to where I want to be, but very good precision, high repeatability. Good accuracy and poor precision would be this. So unlike the first gentleman, this archer, on average, hits the target every single time. However, that requires an average. As you can see, his performance is extremely erratic, even though his average is right on center. And what we want in this world, of course, is high accuracy and high precision. I want to be close to the target when I estimate, and I want to be very repeatable. Those are 2 important concepts. So in this assessment, we did range estimating slightly different than you'd normally do. Normally, you'd sort of talk about it and hash out, a worst case scenario, best case scenario, and a most likely scenario, and you'd have that discussion, and it takes a lot of time. I didn't want to burn a lot of the project team's time, so what we did, we actually used a modified Delphi technique and used eye clickers at the time to allow anonymous polling. And it gave us live results and we could vote. And so we had eye clicker scores, standard ranges for accuracy and precision. And eye clickers looked like that. And they give you results that look like this. But you know what? We can do modified Delphi technique in Zoom without buying clickers. So I need to restart that. So I have a poll going up right now. We're going to do a modified Delphi technique for risk and contingency assessments. The risk one is, what is the probability that I'm going to go over my allotted time tonight? And that goes from remote, unlikely, possible, likely, almost certain. And this is a modified Delphi technique because you can't see how everyone votes as you're voting. I can. And the second question is, given that I actually do end up going over my presentation time, how much will I go over? So we're doing a classic risk evaluation. We're coming up with a probability and an impact. So you guys think it's possible that I'm going to go over? Someone says it's almost certain. I think I know who voted that way. And in terms of how much time, You guys are very nice to me. You only think I'm going to go over my schedule just a little bit. So thank you. I hope not to disappoint, but I might, we'll find out. So that's an example of a modified Delphi technique that you can use on Zoom, and it's the same type of way. So a lot of people don't think in terms of mean and standard deviation, or those ranges I gave. So what we came up with was ordering in a foreign restaurant. You've been to a foreign restaurant where they show you pictures of all the food, so they don't actually write up descriptions because you can't read it. There's a different language. They show you pictures. And so we came up with pictures to help them how they could use the iClickers. The first example is, I know the price perfectly and it is right. In other words, I have the invoice. That distribution would look like this. The next one is, the cost seems right, but I know the price varies significantly. Again, we're centered on the mean, the actual price, but we have a fairly wide distribution. Another one could be, the cost is always higher than expected and it varies widely. So that we get this kind of distribution over here, where we are off the mean in a range, the width of the curve is bigger. And so we set that up in a 5x5 grid. We have increasing precision, worsening precision as we go up. Our curve goes from perfect knowledge to crappy knowledge. And then we have overestimating the cost and underestimating the cost. And that gave us a 5x5 grid that we shared with everybody. They had an example of it in their printed out copy when they were voting. So we would do the range estimating process, and it looked like this. What we did is we took the work breakdown structure at the level 4. We then talked, what is the basis of estimate for this work breakdown structure item? And somebody who knew it would say, this is the basis of estimate. We go, okay, so we know what we're talking about. If the value is over $1 million, we'd continue. If the value is less than $1 million, we would pool this item with other items in the work breakdown structure till we got to at least $1 million. And again, got to think back to, we're looking at a $300-ish million program. So we're going to be doing this approximately 300 times. Then I'd ask the question, are the standard ranges acceptable? So the 5x5 grid, is that okay? And if everyone, yeah, that seems okay, we would go with it. If not, we'd come up with a custom range, and we did for a couple of them. Then I would say, if you don't feel you know enough about this work breakdown structure task, don't vote. Then we'd vote using those iClickers, but you could also do it, again, on Zoom, because it has that functionality of polling. We'd vote on the accuracy and precision of each work breakdown structure item. And then we'd share the results. If the results were typical, like this, that would become our distribution. If they were atypical, so some people said, the accuracy is a 5, and other people said it was a 1, we'd stop and say, did everybody vote as intended? Like, we know that 5 is the most the least known, and 1 is the best known. And somebody go, oh, no, voted wrong. Okay, we'll fix that. If not, then we'd talk about the basis of estimate again, and then we would repoll. And if they were still like this, that's what we'd use. So that is how we did the range estimating method. And again, we'd add to that the risk register. The parametric approach lives in this world. The parametric approach believes somewhere between 70 and 90% of all your project risks, or all your cost and schedule variability, is due to systemic risks. And 2/3 of that is project planning prior to sanction. And then we have things like ownership structure, complexity, new technology. They used to just call it regulatory regime. I've included now social license, because we can see if you're a pipeline, it's a pretty big deal. Failure or escalation, and feedstock. And so that generates somewhere between 70 and 90% of the contingency in the parametric approach. We add to that project-specific risk from the risk register, and that's somewhere between 10 and 30% of our total contingency will come from those. And we do that through a Monte Carlo simulation. And that gives us the contingency method of the parametric approach. One of the key problems in the parametric approach is knowing the difference between systemic risks and project-specific risks. So I'm doing a project right now on the North Shore of Alaska. We're doing a contingency assessment, and I'm 75% of the way through my risk interviews, and my risk register has like 200 risks in it. Probably of those 200 risks, only 6 are going to be project-specific, and therefore included in the parametric assessment. So what is a systemic risk? A systemic risk, crap, sorry, what do you got going on? That was Jason Kenney's announcement, apparently. Probably happened on your phones too, or will shortly. Systemic risks tend to be addressed by progressive stage gate development. So you might have in your risk register, we got crappy soil. Well, the answer is, well, how do we find out if we have crappy soil? Well, you go out and dig some boreholes and do a borehole program. Have you done that yet? No? Well, if you do that, that risk of crappy dirt is going to be known or not known, or proven or not a threat. 2, threats that don't have a credible threat or fear. So like my favorite on this one, we were doing a project and they were like, this was back maybe a decade ago when free men on the land were a thing. And like, we're afraid of free men on the land. It's just like, okay, do we have a reason why we're afraid of that? Or is it just a topical thing? If you don't have a credible threat, it's probably a systemic risk. The next one is fun. If you can't readily estimate a risk's probability or impact, it's probably systemic. And so my favorite one on this is, what are the odds of engineering drawings being late on your project? And the answer is like 100%. At least one of them is going to be late. Okay, now what's the impact of that drawing being late? And people go, well, I don't know. It could be catastrophic, like it could, the main component isn't correctly drawn, or it could be trivial and I can absorb it with no problem. I don't know the impact. That's the kind of risk that screams a systemic risk. And finally, risks whose response is, let's do our job well. Now, no one ever says it that way, but the response might be, we have communication problems. That's a risk. Well, what are you going to do about that? Well, we'll have meetings and we'll have agendas and we'll have minutes and we'll have document control. And it's like, okay, so it sounds like you're going to follow industry best practices, which is called doing your job really well. Guess what? That's a systemic risk. So if it can happen to anybody's project, it's usually a systemic risk. Project-specific risks, to contrast that, is you've made assumptions in your forecast that defy data, logic, or best practices. And so my favorite is, I see schedules and I look at the basis of schedule and I say, how many weather delay days do you have in it? And they go, well, 0. And it's like, well, that's not the right answer. Let's go to Environment Canada and find out how many weather delay days you'd normally have on this project in this season. So that's an example of, you're just not following the information you have. You're ignoring it. Those can create project-specific risks. The next one is you're ignoring credible threats. There's an example there, but my other one is like, a general fear. It's like, we might have some concerns with dealing with First Nations. Okay, well, that's possible. The other is, we have a letter from the First Nations saying they hate us and they're burning us in effigy right now. Well, guess what? You got a credible threat there, buddy. Well, it's your project. The next one is that contrasts to, you can't estimate the risk. A subject matter expert can actually reasonably estimate the risk. They can come up with probabilities, 3-point probability and 3-point impact, cost for schedule impact. And finally, fourth, is you have seasonal constraints or constraints on your project that are atypical. For instance, the project we're doing on the North Shore in Alaska, we got to get everything there. We got road bans in Alberta, we're used to that. They got like bigger road ban problems than we can imagine. Just the freight on one thing is like $80,000, getting it from Anchorage to the North Shore. It's just like, wow, okay. So those are types of things that become project-specific risks. Another way of thinking it is, this is a risk that will happen to my project that wouldn't happen to anybody else's project. Those tend to be project-specific. And as you can see, when you use this lens, you can take that list of 200 risk items and drop it down to like 5 or 6 pretty quick. So that's one of the advantages of the parametric approach is you're actually only quantifying a handful of risks as opposed to 100 or so. This is a breakout of my tool. We asked some questions about business fundamentals, your scope, your planning, your design, your engineering, the nature of your team. We look at how you've done reviews, and we risk modifiers. I joke, it's 50 multiple choice questions that we answer as a team. Here's one example. It's on your business case. This is a business planning process or business fundamentals. Your business case, how do you do drivers, project drivers, and trade-offs on scope, schedule, budget? And we go through here and we say, I think we're about 3 or 2. And we agree on that as a team. And ahead of time, I've actually reviewed all of your performance, and I build you up when you're being bashful, and I knock you down when you're being aggressive. And we come to a general consensus on these options. And again, what's nice about 50 multiple choice questions is while it takes a little bit, no one question throws the answers. And as an aside, my favorite was with a client one time, can't remember the question, but one of the questions, category, one of the questions was water, hydro test, potable, fire water, storm water, and they went hydro test water. And they went like, we're building a pipeline. Who's looked after our hydro test water? No one in the room had. It was like, okay, I just earned my fees today by asking that one question. So it's a nice check on, have we done all the work that we think we need to do? And so that's the basis of the parametric system and how we address that 70 to 90% of that big pie chart we saw earlier. So it's possible I had some flaws in my approach. The first one is everyone in this, me, not everyone, 75% of you or even more like to do facilitated risk workshops. I like doing them too. They're kind of fun. You get juiced, you get sticky tab notes and you're doing stuff. It's great. But we did interviews. So did interviews cut short? Oh, we have a question. Isaac, Austin?
Yeah. Just before we move on the risk, between parametric and the systemic ones. I mean the generic ones. Would you then model those ones in your risk modeling, or would you just basically ignore them and just focus on the project specific?
Good question, Austin. Thank you. So, for the contingency calculation, I do not care about the systemic risks.
Yeah.
They add no contingency. However, just because the risk is systemic doesn't mean I can't actually do something about it. So I'll go back to communication problems. We might have communication problems. Like, okay, so you're concerned about that. What are you going to do about it? Well, we're going to have minutes. We're going to have standing meetings. We're going to have a RACI chart. We're going to have, how do we elevate problems on the team, et cetera, et cetera. We're going to have rules and we'll share those and keep documents. It's like, great. Those are systemic responses to a systemic risk. And so I stress this with some project managers. Just because a risk is systemic doesn't mean you can't do something about it. And so we go back to like these boreholes. I'm really concerned about having bad dirt. Well, what are you going to do about that? Well, we're going to hire a company and we're going to go out and we're going to do a geotechnical survey. Okay, good. Put it in a risk register. Keep track of doing it. Did I answer your question, Austin? You can just shake your head yes.
All right, thanks. Yeah, you do.
Great question. And everyone else, if something's not clear, jump in and ask me. So, do risk interviews cut short risk identifications? At the time, I didn't know. I was just trying to save them some money because they were really tight on budget. And I've done a bunch of workshops and a bunch of interviews, and this is my own personal data. I went back and randomly picked some out and said, how many unique risks did I get doing workshops versus interviews? And I look at the data and I go, you know what? That looks really similar to me. Maybe I'm just a skilled interviewer, but with a skilled interviewer, you get about the same gross quantity of unique risks with interviews as the workshop. So if your objective is to do, in addition to creating a risk register, is do some team building, project sharing, and et cetera, et cetera. All means do a workshop. If your objective is, I need the risk register and I want to spend 1 hour of the project team's time instead of 7, because maybe I got schedule constraints or something of that nature, interviews do not sacrifice your risk register. So that was fun to know. The next one that I had some questions about is, we use that 5x5 grid a lot of accuracy and precision. And did that grid constrain people? Did it like change how we evaluated ranges? And so I did heat maps of the 5x5 grid in phase 1 and phase 2. And I look at those heat maps and say, you know what? No one even voted a 4-4 here, ever. So my ranges weren't really constraining people. And what they allowed us to do, instead of having an open discussion about, you know, what's the worst case, what's the best case, what's the most likely case, and walking through that with the team, it usually takes like 15 to 20 minutes per line item. We were able to get through every line item in about 5 minutes. And it didn't appear to hamper the results. So that's a fun takeaway. Resource requirements. Again, in these resource requirements, keep in mind, we did interviews instead of a workshop. So we saved a bunch of resources there. And rather than doing open discussion on ranges, I had parameters that we used. So we got through those 300-ish line items in about 5 minutes each. And yes, it still took a day and it was a painful day, but we got it done in a day instead too. So let's look at those resource requirements. So the first one we're gonna look at is consultant hours. I did this back when I was at Stantec. A little bloated by my standards today. Normally I like to brag I can get a parametric done in a week, ideally. So you can imagine how many hours I spend in that. But this is the actual hours we charged the project. There was myself and an assistant because I needed a scribe and all those things for a lot of the sessions. And so we spent 263 hours amongst the two approaches. And there's the breakdown of where we spent the time. Range estimating a bunch, risk review sessions, interviews. The next thing, so let's look at how those hours broke out. So we have a bunch of common tasks, and up to 260 some odd hours, about 140 of those were common. So they were needed for both the parametric and the Monte Carlo. Then for the Monte Carlo, we needed another about 100 man hours to run the Monte Carlo. Once we had those common tasks done, we would need another 30, 40 to do the parametric. And so if you take away what's required to do a range estimate, you're left with this little tiny box of, that's the incremental effort, if you're wed to Monte Carlos, of how much effort you need to spend to do a parametric at the same time. And it's really a trivial amount of work. So the next thing is, I like to joke, you know, I like to get paid. I like to think I charge a reasonable, healthy hourly rate. However, I also know that my time in doing these contingency assessments is actually less than the cost of the project team's time. So we want to minimize those project team hours. And we did that, of course, by doing interviews and having a Delphi technique for the range estimating. So again, we look at the common tasks. We had about 60, give or take, hours of project team time and common tasks. We had another 150, give or take, for range estimating. The parametric dedicated time was about another 40 or 50 hours. And again, we do the same thing. You're already doing a Monte Carlo. The extra project team time is minimal. So now we get to the money shots. So this was phase 1. We see the green line is the parametric curve, as we talked about before. Bell curves are easily identified, and you can sort of compare one curve to another. However, I like these are cumulative frequency distributions. And what's nice about them is you can say, for instance, the odds of the parametric estimate of being our point estimate of $130 million are about 10%. And you can say 90% of the time I'm going to be $170 million or less. So what's nice about these, while they're not as intuitive as a bell curve, they give you a lot more data. And so the green was the parametric estimate. And the parametric said, you know, there's about a 10% chance of meeting our base point estimate. The blue curve was the Monte Carlo range estimating, and it said you have a 0% chance of meeting this. But our worst case is not as bad. That's where actual costs came out about. They came out at like the top end, the 95th percentile of the range estimate and about the 90th percentile of the parametric. Now, again, for a guy talking about which ones is better, you'd look at that and say, well, both of them are pretty crappy, Matthew. Yeah, thanks for agreeing, Austin. I saw him nod, thank you. The one thing I will say is this. Whose children here, raise your hand if your child is below average intelligence. Now, if this wasn't an audience, nobody would have their hand up because nobody believes their child is below average. But you know what? On average, half of our kids are below average. That's what the average means. So that's the horrible thing about statistics is we don't like them when we don't like them. So when we say this is hitting the P90 on the parametric curve, we're saying it's a 1 in 10 chance. So 1 in 10 projects are going to be at the P90. That's what the P90 means. So that's kind of ugly. So for people who don't like graphs, there's the actual numbers. There's the base estimate, 131 million. The range estimating added 75. The systemic risk added 15. For systemic risks, I basically said I knew what risk were systemic and not systemic on the risk register. The parametric tool would spit out 8 million for those risks, and the project-specific risks were about 10 million both ways. So you can see that the expected value in the range estimating was much higher, but had a narrower distribution. And that's what we'd expect from theory. Phase 2. Hey, curves overlap here. That's kind of nice. Again, we have the point estimate. The parametric is saying the odds of meeting the point estimate were about 20%. Range estimating said, it only goes from P5 to P95. So it's like, functionally 0. And we can see the range. Again, the parametric's giving us a much larger range of cost outcomes. And that's where the cost came out on phase 2. And one thing I'd like to point out here, that's pretty obvious. Again, we're seeing the cost is hitting that P90-ish on the parametric approach, but you can see the range estimating said the worst scenario is like $185 million on our 155 million base estimate. And the actual costs were substantially above that. The range estimating completely failed to say that was a possibility.
Matthew?
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
It kind of looks like the difference between a class 4 and a class 5 or 3 slope, like in terms of that cumulative forecast there.
Yeah.
Just the slope is that much
Ridiculously steeper. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just an observation when I look
no,
at
I
that.
completely agree with you, Jeff. One of the reasons I offered to do a free post-mortem on this because I was interested in the results because I was going to do this paper because it's like I did a literature search and no one has a comparative head-to-head paper like this. So I was like, okay, that's interesting. And I know where my interests lie and biases lie, and I was really curious to see how true they were. One thing I could argue to myself, but I don't have access to the notes, is maybe I did a really crappy job of range estimating on phase 2. Maybe the phase 2 team was better able to lie to Matthew than the phase 1 team.
Or it's just overconfidence bias too. It's just you can see the slope. It's almost like a changing class of estimate.
Oh yeah, and it's a marked difference.
Yeah.
And my tongue-in-cheek answer to that, Jeff, is like, well, whatever problems, heuristic biases, or errors I had in doing the range estimate on phase 2, I didn't seem to have them on the phase 1, and they don't seem to be present in the parametric.
Yeah.
So there's me another way of spinning that back to you, rather than me saying I did a crappy job, saying I did a great job. How's that for being a consultant?
Hey, that's exactly what you're supposed to be.
You're right, except for when you're wrong, Mr. Client. Thanks, Jeff.
That's the estimator's caveat. We're always wrong.
Just how much are we wrong? No numbers. I only know numbers when I have the invoice and we've agreed to pay it. So let's agree with ACE. Basically, ACE has some general principles about how risk and contingency processes should be used. And they say, does it meet client objectives? Is it part of a process? Is it fit for use? Does it identify risk drivers, i.e. does it use a risk register? Do you link risk to outcome? Do you avoid those self-inflicted gunshot wounds? And as we can see here, Jeff, Parametric does a better job of avoiding those self-inflicted gunshot wounds. You can see there's lots of opportunities in range estimating in Monte Carlos to have self-inflicted gunshot wounds. Does it employ data? Parametric? Mostly yes. I mean, we're still doing opinions on those few project-specific risks. In range estimating, the hardcore people say, well, it always does. And it's like, really? Because I've done $100 billion of projects, and most companies don't have data on their cost and schedule ranges. We're still doing opinions. Was the person competent? I'd like to think so. Did it provide probabilistic results? You bet. And did it support your decision-making process? Yes. So both, of course, they're supported by ACE. Lo and behold, how we did them also met ACE requirements. So here's some conclusions. So both had probabilistic results. Parametric gives you a wider range that reflects history. Range estimating or Monte Carlos give you narrower ranges. In both cases, the parametric was able to predict the outcome at the P90 level. In only one of the instances did range estimating able to predict the outcome at the P95 level. And P95 again is like a 1 in 20 chance. So not so good. So we'd probably give accuracy to parametric there. Here's some thoughts on resource conservation. We like cut the amount of time doing range estimating in like half by using the eye clickers. And if I was to do Monte Carlos again, because the client wants it, I would totally do some kind of modified Delphi technique again. Risk interviews, cut your number of project team hours by like a 7th or an 8th, depending on the number of project teams you have. And it saves you stuff and doesn't seem to cost you anything. So those are two thoughts on resource conservation. Now let's look at actual consumption, given that we had resource conservation practices in place. The parametric system requires 40%, I'd probably go 60% now, less consultant hours and 60% less project team time than Monte Carlos. So you can say that's directly proportional to cost to make the system go. And then the flip side of that is if you're wedded to Monte Carlos, and a lot of you use Monte Carlos at work, if you're already doing a Monte Carlo, throwing in a parametric assessment doesn't add a lot of cost. Only an extra 10% consulting hours and an extra 15% project team hours. So that gives you tremendous value. We talked about IPL a little bit earlier in this, and where IPL is almost exactly where I predicted where they'd be before they started. And so I come back to if you're wedded to Monte Carlos, figure out a way to get a little bit more budget in and spend the extra, $5, $10, $15,000 and do a parametric at the same time, because the incremental cost is very little. So, in my opinion, the winner of this cage match was the parametric system. It's better, it's faster, and it's definitely cheaper. But my question is for you, what do y'all think? What is the best contingency method for speed, cost, and accuracy that's supported by ACE? Those are your 4 options.
This is parametric on this. Yeah?
Well, don't spoil it, Austin. I want to see what people actually think in an anonymous poll. So I converted a couple people. So that's good. I'll show results. There you go. So about 85% of us think parametric. And again, this is a bit of a trick question. There is no right answer. Again, you go back to all those first lines of what should a contingency process be? It needs to be fit for purpose. And doing what I just suggested, a lot of you do projects under 5 million, doing what I just suggested, this methodology on a project under $5 million, I mean, I'm a consultant, so I'll take your money, but I can't look you straight in the face and say, it is good value for money on $1 million project. You know, take that $10,000, $15,000, spend it on something else. Because other project controls are probably going to give you a better bang for the buck on those small projects. But you know, if you're doing 100 million, 50 million, or $1 billion project, yeah, I believe parametric is excellent bang for the buck. And now we have bonus content. So a while ago, a client asked me, Matthew, when I change this answer in your tool, how much contingency does that have? And it's just like, I don't know. Well, I do know because I did the math, but the point is, it's like, no, the tool is looking holistically at your project and what you know about the project. And it's an E.N.E. Prue quote from the shipping news that I read as a young child that I love is, one of the beans in the can made me fart, but I don't know which one. And it's the same thing with systemic risks. We're evaluating you on a holistic basis. I don't know which one of these things will let you down, but in aggregate, it'll give you a problem. And this gave me a clue to, they're so used to thinking in their deterministic views that they can't conceive that we're looking at it holistically. And so when Monte Carlos run things, they say, well, here, I can tell you my uncertainty and my estimate that are due to quantity ranges. It's this. And I add to that my price ranges, and I can add that to my scope risks and my procurement risks and my design risks, my regulatory risks, my construction risks, my commissioning risks, and I can get you a curve in the parametric model, and I can tell you where every single dollar in that contingency traces back to. And if you're in the estimating world, that's how we estimate a project. So why don't we estimate contingency that way too? And that's why a lot of people like Monte Carlos, I think. The problem is the actual range of cost outcomes looks like this. And so we have this whole chunk of red curve here that Monte Carlos simply can't access. And the reason why is there's all these unknown unknowns. You know, I just lost his name. Not Dick Cheney. Donald Rumsfeld quote, thank you. The Donald Rumsfeld quote, you know, there's the known knowns, the known unknowns, and the unknown unknowns. The Monte Carlo system to work, I need to actually be able to actually know all those unknown unknowns.
Yeah.
And I need to be able to evaluate them correctly. That's a fundamental assumption of the Monte Carlo approach. And then there's problems like central limit theorems. I got a great little post about that. And actually, there's a great paper I read this year that basically says, even in the best case scenario, we're only able to identify half of our risks. Like when we go and say, you know, what risks actually occurred in the project? Now let's compare that to a risk register originally. We say like, of the 50 original risks that actually happened, we only identified 25. And so this is a bit of a different worldview. We accept that there's a big things that we don't know, but we know, we might not know what causes them, but we know their impacts. So in the parametric view, it works opposite. We start with this final cost curve, and we say, here are my scope risks, here are my procurement risks, blah, 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 my commissioning risks. And you'll notice all of these risks are a lot smaller than in the Monte Carlo world. And that's because a lot of the risks are systemic. They're driven by culture, they're driven by how large projects behave. My favorite abused quote is, mega projects are the same the world over, just like a Russian novel. They all fail for the same reasons. They behave the same. It doesn't matter who's doing the mega project, where it's located, what they're doing, they all have the same cost behaviors. And that's true also in large projects. Now, if you want to improve project performance, on the Monte Carlos, you attack every single one of those line items and you try to winnow them down. For a parametric view, what I need to do is for these project-specific risks, I need to go mitigate those risks. I need to reduce the probabilities and the impacts and shift them smaller. And for the systemic risks, that's most of them, I need to actually go do things about how my process works. I need to have document control. I need to have standing meetings. I need to have a RACE chart. I need to have a work breakdown structure. I need to have a schedule. I need to do all of those things. I need to go do geotechnical work. I need to have First Nations consultation. Sorry, not consultation. Engagement. Consultation is a big C word. And so if you do those things, you can actually shift the curve to the left. Now I am done. And not that much over time. You guys were right. Amazing. So questions?
Very good. So just a general question now.
Yeah.
On the, you've given a good reason why parametric, if you like, won the cage battle, right? Mm-hmm. But I will also think that, you know, the parametric model in itself is based on history, isn't it? Is
yes.
based on the fact that you came up with those parameters, and then those parameters have correlations to historical data to be able to say, yeah, that if you're doing this size of equipment or whatever, this is how much it costs. So there's an element of history that has incorporated all those risks, in practical terms. Yeah. So I mean that I'm just wondering if that is a correct conclusion.
That is a very correct conclusion. So I will say this nicely. One of the reasons why range estimating in Monte Carlos are so prevalent is because anybody can go buy at risk a crystal ball and they can do it themselves. They might do it really poorly and go into all sorts of math problems. And I actually a subject matter expert witness was on the stand on Monday talking about this. And the people who did it basically is like, I bought the software, so I know how to do this now. It's like, no, you don't. So that's what's nice about range estimating. I didn't appreciate this when I first gave the talk, but I've come to the knowledge in the past 2 years, there's only like a half dozen parametric models out there. Mine is one of them. And it wasn't something I whipped off in an afternoon. I joke, number of hours, I don't know, but I consulted like 8 inches of published papers to generate it. So actually having the model, creating the model is a significant endeavor. But if you already have it, it's super easy to use. Answer your question, Austin? Okay.
Yeah, it does.
Thank you very much, Matthew. This is Gökhan. If that's the case, I think you answered my question most likely. The parametric AACE 42R08, you have modified it, right? You've added project risks.
Yeah.
Which it doesn't talk about it. Am I right?
So, sorry, this is totally correct. Now you can see the history here. So in January, February of this year, there was a new AACE recommended practice that came out that actually tells you to add the risk register into the parametric tool. And I'll smile. I've been doing it that way for a decade. John Holman's been doing it for a decade. John, and credit to him, got off and actually created a new recommended practice to support what we've been doing all along.
Thank you.
So, yeah, so that's why I say these were the recommended practices 4 or 5 years ago. They've changed slightly in terms of numbers and they've gotten more sophisticated, but at their heart, it's still a parametric or it's still some kind of Monte Carlo. Good question. Did I answer it?
Absolutely. Thank you.
There's a good risk group subgroup on the AACE website. If you go into the communities there and drill down into that, they did the early recommended practice review in March or May of this year. I don't think it's that RP has been finally finalized yet, but it's actually a really good one because it does give you rather than just saying plus, the upper and the upper lowers, it gives you a way to apply some conditions. It's an interesting methodology. I think John was on that one too.
Oh, I'm sure John.
He's all over it.
When we talk about John, we talk about John Holman. I used to consider him my spiritual mentor on this whole process, because I met this approach using John's tool at Enbridge, and I did a preliminary calibration on it. And depending if I weighted by project count or by spending, the expected average portfolio cost outcome versus the actual cost outcome was within 0.5%. And I was just like, no effing way. And this was John's model for a decade ago, and I don't have access to it anymore. But there was all sorts of flaws. Like, I was constantly correcting things in his model. And at the time, the model was actually, it's gonna sound funny, his model like a decade ago was actually a symmetrical distribution. And it was still within 0.5%. And it's like, well, we know it's not a symmetrical. It was one of the feedbacks I gave to him. It's like, my data seems to be log normal. Why is the model not log normal? It's like, well, actually it should be log normal. Taking some of the learnings from his, I made a better mousetrap. Or what I thought was a better mousetrap. Good question, Jeff. Thanks for adding.
Thank you. Arvid, I'll turn to you to close it up. There's no more questions, but thank you very much for being our initial speaker for the season here, Matthew.
More than welcome.
Yeah, it was great to see you.
Yes, thank you, Matthew. Thank you for kicking us off for this year. This was an awesome presentation.
Oh, sorry, one thing I do want to add though, is when I talked about small projects, you want to do parametric on small projects, got a whole different solution for you.